You know, one of the things I find that's really crazy about living in the city, Sacramento, is that, you know, there's so much going on here, and most people act like there's like nothing. I mean, look at this. It's beautiful out here. Not just the beauty, also one of those things that I just don't understand. Like, when I was growing up as a kid, you know, nobody acted like this place had anything. They acted like, you know, it's nowhere USA. Which is, you know, I guess like anywhere, you don't really like the city you're born in. It takes a while. And I mean, sometimes you find out, you know what, that hatred wasn't misplaced. I didn't like that place because it fucking sucked. But here's the thing. If you look around, you might find out about the place that you've been born into. It's maybe not the worst place somebody could have been born in. I mean, I've lived in a lot of places. I've lived in Colorado. Beautiful, by the way. I would recommend it to anybody who likes the cold like I do. But, and I've also lived in Arizona. Lived a little bit in Washington for just like a few months. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with those places. Of course. I'm not sitting here shitting on anything. In fact, my whole thing is, like, I try to look at even the cool things about places I don't like. The guy really didn't like Arizona. It's dry. People there are mostly rich people who are fucking self-centered. But there's stuff there too. But anyway, my biggest point is that you should always be looking for knowledge. And when you find it, don't just look at it and go like, ah, there's a good piece. I'm done now. Because it's really not going to help you as much as you think. See, I decided to come down to the river because I was looking for this. What is this? Well, it's just a bunch of rocks, right? A lot of this is magnetite or hematite, laminite, a mixture of iron ore. And it's scattered everywhere here. And now you might be thinking, well, why does that matter? Like, so what? Well, let me extrapolate this for you. The sword-making traditions of Japan started out as very much a copy of the Chinese sword-making tradition. Now, I'm extrapolating again, so take what I'm about to say a little bit with a grain of salt, but I'm more just looking at how history has kind of put it. And if I'm wrong, please let me know. But when they broke away from the empire, ore is not really like super easy to find in Japan, iron-wise. And so you start to ask yourself these questions. Like, for me, as a kid growing up in the mid 90s, and I grew up with a mom who was very into action movies, like super into action movies. Not only that, but she loved horror. And so I very much got a schooling of that growing up. And so, you know, you hear all these mythical things about Japanese, you know, steel, samurai swords and such. Like, they're almost mystical in the way they're talked about. And don't get me wrong, they're awesome. That's why I'm on this tangent. But for a person like me who's a science nerd, you start asking yourself a question. Like, okay, how did they make these swords, right? And so this is where I'm kind of coming back around to it, where I was giving you the history first, kind of on purpose, so you'll know where I'm going. So I'm looking up, like, okay, how are these swords made? Because it's just awesome to figure out. And you find out, oh, well, there's a lot of iron sand in Japan. And so they took what they had, you know, the iron sand, and they refined it, and then they made steel out of it. Which I think is just awesome. So I'm doing what I normally do, which is, you know, just researching, reading more and more and more. And then I start to ask myself a question. Isn't the sand around here pretty dark? Because I know there's white sand beaches, and there's black sand beaches. But are all black sand beaches magnetite or hematite? So I look it up, and I mean, at least as far as I can tell, I'm not an expert, again, is that... Sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. Is that... Oh, that's right. Sorry, ADHD. Is that, you know, not all black sand is probably magnetite or hematite. It's more likely like basalt or something. It just depends on where you're at. But, and here's the big, the $20 question. I mean, the $20 answer to the question. Is this black sand, is the sand that's darker, does it have iron in it? Does this have iron in it? And yeah, that's what I showed you, that big old, that thing, that's mostly just black hematite, lamatite, and it's just, like, obviously it's not like the Japanese black sand, because theirs is a lot, one, it's darker, and it's much more rich. But there is iron ore here, and it's very accessible. You just kind of have to know what you're doing. So I have this thought experiment. Think about this. The Bronze Age was a lot to do with the fact that copper and tin were hard commodities to come by. And because of that, they used those as much as they could. But what a lot of people don't understand is those things are actually a lot more abundant in the old world. But a source of iron really isn't, unless you know what you're doing to reduce a lot of things. But let's not get into that, because obviously, like the Scandinavians and the Irish, they did bog iron and stuff like that. But we're not talking about that right now. Bronze was just easier to work with, and it was just more readily available. But the opposite is kind of true here in America. A lot of the metal that's here isn't tin and bronze. It's not... We have copper, obviously, but there's just not as much of it as there is in the old world, where you at least seemingly from what I've read, and again, I'm not an expert, I could be very wrong, that's what happened, is that You know, people have this instinctual idea that you have to make bronze and then you make iron. Well, really, it comes down to what your resources are. And if your resources are iron, you're going to figure that out. If you have a understanding of metallurgy. And this is where my thought experiment kind of comes in. Is think about this. The tribes in California, especially in this valley, in the Sacramento Valley, were very nomadic. And they didn't really have a background of metallurgy or blacksmithing or smelting traditions. In fact, I'm not even sure much of how they would have fared working with glass. I mean, maybe they had, maybe they hadn't. But unfortunately, that's a lot of history that is lost to time, and would have to maybe find, I don't know, a tribe around here that maybe could give me some more information, which would be awesome. And I would always love to listen. So my thought experiment was, though, what if, of course, and this is a big if, they had figured it out? I mean, there are some natural ways they could have. You know, you build a big enough fire, you heat it for long enough in sand, you're going to get a glassy material. And then when you start to notice some of that glass is stronger than another, or it's colored a different way, you're going to start to go down different routes. But here's the thing. Nomads don't really focus on things like that. They focus on eating, sleeping, and survival. And it's just, how crazy would it have been if they had skipped the Bronze Age completely and went straight to the Iron Age? What would that have been like? I mean, imagine an entire bunch of people in the old world having a technology that's thousands of years ahead. Like, what would they have done? I mean, of course, many would say probably conquer, and I'm not going to say no. But it really depends, again, on your resources. And I tend to look at it and go, there's so much here in California that if they had, it probably wouldn't have been too much of a jump for them to become an expansionist nation. Expansionist nation. It's all about resources. But then again, there's the other side. Maybe they wouldn't have. Maybe they would have decided, we got everything here. What's the point in conquering anything? Maybe that's why they were nomads. I mean, there's so much rich thought to be looked at just by going down a rabbit hole that you might think, like, katanas? To hear? And I'm looking at you going, yeah, katanas. To hear. Because somebody looked at it the same way I did then, and were like, hey, you know that glass we make? It has that weird blue color. That happens when iron or whatever the Chinese people give to us, right? Yeah. Well, we're no longer partnering with them, so maybe we use this stuff and see if we can make some iron. Of course, you know, I'm putting on a Brooklyn accent for fun and for shits and giggles, but that's really how history is. It's somebody looking at the thing and expanding from there. And I want everybody just to think on that for a minute, because I think that's just so cool. Alrighty, peace.